I never imagined that helping someone could feel so heavy, yet here I am, staring at my phone in the middle of the night, my thumb hovering over the block button I know I'll never press. My name is Clara, I'm 31, and I've learned the hard way that sometimes supporting someone you care about isn't as simple as it sounds. It all started a few months ago when he reached out to me, a man I thought I had long since stopped thinking about. Ethan. My heart still tightens at the sound of his name, not with longing, but with that strange mix of worry, frustration, and something I can't quite name. He had been spiraling quietly, or maybe I had been too busy to notice, wrapped up in my own life, career, and endless social obligations. But one day a message appeared on my phone, "I don't know who else to talk to." That single sentence changed everything. At first I hesitated. My friends would have told me to keep my distance, to protect my peace, to block him and move on. I knew all the advice by heart, yet something in his words stopped me from doing that. Something in his vulnerability called to the side of me that couldn't turn away. The first few weeks were manageable, almost casual. He would text sporadically, sometimes sharing tiny victories, other times sinking into dark confessions that made my chest ache. Each message tugged at me in different ways. He was struggling, yes, but it wasn't always clear with what. Sometimes it was his work, sometimes relationships, sometimes demons I couldn't name. I tried to offer comfort, small words that seemed meaningless in the grand scope of his storm, yet he clung to them like lifelines. I warned myself more than once that I was crossing boundaries, that I was opening doors I shouldn't have. But each time I thought of pulling back, the messages became more desperate, more raw. "I don't know how to face tomorrow," he wrote once, and my heart practically leapt into my throat. How could I leave him alone when he sounded so lost? How could I block someone who seemed to need me like this, even if it was draining every ounce of my patience and energy? The irony was not lost on me. I had spent years pushing people away, insisting I was fine on my own, refusing to be dragged into other people's emotional storms. And yet, here I was, fully immersed in one, tethered to someone whose life was unraveling, unsure if my support was helping or simply prolonging the inevitable pain. Days turned into nights, and nights into endless scrolling, reading messages over and over, trying to decipher what was real and what was his internal chaos projected onto me. I remember one particularly dark evening. He sent a text that simply read, "I feel like everything I've built is falling apart, and I don't know who I am anymore." I stared at it, my mind racing. I wanted to reply, to fix it, to pull him from the brink, but I knew there was nothing I could do. I could not fix him. I could not erase the battles that only he could fight. All I could do was remain, a silent witness, a voice in the dark, a shoulder even when it felt like the weight might crush me too. And then came the moments that tested me most. When he lashed out, text messages full of anger, confusion, and blame, I felt the sting of words that weren't meant for me but landed squarely on my chest. "Why don't you understand? Why can't you see I'm drowning?" they read. I had to remind myself repeatedly, these weren't attacks, these were cries for help. Yet, it was impossible not to feel the emotional bruises, the subtle erosion of my own well-being as I tried to balance being supportive with not losing myself in the process. I started noticing how his dependence affected my daily life. I would wake up, check my phone first thing, anticipating a message, a sign, a plea. My work suffered, my concentration faltered, and still I could not bring myself to step back. Blocking him seemed unthinkable, cruel even. And yet, each conversation left me emotionally raw, questioning the boundaries of empathy and responsibility. Where does support end and enabling begin? One afternoon he called me unexpectedly. His voice trembled with exhaustion, almost breaking over the phone. "Clara, I don't know how I'm going to handle this week," he whispered. I listened, my fingers tightening around the edge of my desk. I wanted to tell him it would be okay, that I'd be there, that somehow things would make sense again. But I could only stay calm, steady, reassuring, giving him a sliver of stability he couldn't seem to find anywhere else. I didn't realize then that this tiny act of presence would slowly become a lifeline, not for him alone but for me too. As weeks passed, the pattern became almost ritualistic. I would provide support, he would retreat, frustration and despair would rise, and I would remain. People around me began noticing the toll it was taking. Friends questioned my choices, worried about my emotional safety. "Why do you let him do this to you?" one asked, concern etched in her eyes. But they didn't understand the complexity of it, how sometimes being there for someone in crisis was not just a choice but a compulsion born of empathy, of history, of connection that refused to be severed easily. The turning point came one evening when he admitted something I hadn't fully expected. "Clara, I don't deserve your patience," he said quietly. I froze. There was honesty in that sentence, raw and unpolished, revealing the weight of his guilt alongside his pain. It struck me how much he relied on me not just for comfort but for validation, for proof that someone still believed in him when he had stopped believing in himself. And in that moment I understood why I couldn't block him. Because blocking him would erase not just our connection, but the fragile thread of trust and hope I could offer. I knew I had to be present even when it hurt, even when the emotional cost felt unbearable. And yet, even as I made that silent decision, a part of me wondered how long I could sustain it, how long I could remain a lifeline without losing myself entirely in the process. I stared at my reflection later that night, the phone beside me still glowing with his last message, "Thank you for being here even when I'm at my worst." And I realized that supporting someone through their darkest times is not about heroics or sacrifice. It's about presence, patience, and boundaries carefully maintained, even in the midst of chaos. I couldn't block him and I didn't. And as much as it challenged me, exhausted me, and tested the limits of my compassion, I knew that sometimes the hardest choice, the one that weighs heaviest on your soul, is also the one that matters most. Because being there, even when it hurts, can mean the difference between someone surviving their storm or being swallowed by it entirely.